Thanks for joining me. I've been challenged to watch a Doctor Who story and to see if I can guess what it is that my special guest particularly likes about this one. Welcome to Happy Times and Places, with me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, writer Simon Guerrier, who has chosen Evil of the Daleks for us to watch, and we're up to episode 3. Well, welcome back. It's episode 3, and the Daleks are about to embark on their dastardly plan as we freeze again and watch a reconstructed version of Evil of the Daleks. I am about to press play in 3, 2, 1, now. Excellent. So we're back to stills, which is a real shame. Isn't it interesting that episode 2, which is the episode that exists, is it the only one that hasn't got any filmed material in it? And film material is, of course, where the money is, and it's often in episode 1 to, get people hooked into the story. No, you see, they've gone Evil of the Daleks by David Whittaker, episode 3, whereas the moving episode went episode 2 by David Whittaker. Now, that may have been an anomaly. Who knows? Now, I do know that this cliffhanger was refilmed because they've got an extra Dalek on set. So you would have had... its eyes would have glowed and Gerald Taylor would have done his acting. And the thing I didn't say about the Lost in Time set of having those episodes is that, of course, when I'd collected the single episodes, which I loved doing because it was like getting a glimpse at part of one of the Dead Sea Scrolls because you couldn't see the rest of the story, and I found that fascinating, that window into the past. But when I first started collecting, this episode did not episode 2 of Evil of the Daleks did not exist. So when the Lost in Time set came out, I had got Evil 2 by then, and in not bad quality, but nonetheless, seeing them on Lost in Time all cleaned up, whereas when a lot of those old episodes, when you got them bootlegged, that was the only way to get them in those days, it looked like they were bad photocopies that had been slashed by Zorro, because, terrible quality. But again, that was part of it, actually seeing through the I actually think, in much the way that, the telesnaps coming back for this episode have given us sight of Arthur Terrell, for example, who we otherwise didn't have pictures of. Is that gradually bits come back and fill our knowledge. Having seen the episodes first in really bad quality, I then got an extra boost when I saw them in really good quality, and then having listened to murky soundtracks, to then see a reconstruction, give at least it's a sort of dimension, it's a sort of feeling of it, and then I'm sure, well, I for not this episode but other episodes, I've since then seen animated versions of or reconstructions that are have been done again and aren't on VHS but are on the DVD. So each time you see something new or something becomes clearer, and I love that. It's like when you're an archaeologist, you paint away, don't you, gradually uncovering layers. And that's a bit like being a Doctor Who fan, is that every time every time something new is discovered, our understanding increases, but our experience of it is therefore improved. I mean, there's a number of stories that I thought looked much better having seen them in really tarted up quality. I'm interested in these episodes though, because as I say, there's a long fight, but of course it was filmed at Grimsdyke House, which is the house of Gilbert or Sullivan. I'm going to say Gilbert, I think, of Gilbert and Sullivan. I always nearly say Gilbert O'Sullivan. There is a pop star called Gilbert O'Sullivan, sang a song called Matrimony. He's still about. But it always confused me as a kid because people would talk about Gilbert and Sullivan and Gilbert O'Sullivan, and Gilbert O'Sullivan isn't really called Gilbert O'Sullivan, so he's obviously named himself to go, I will be reminiscent of Gilbert and Sullivan, who wrote HMS Pinafore and all the other things. There's a great thing on this recon using actual shots from the house and a practical Dalek prop to sort of ape what we would have seen, and from the evidence of the telesnaps, they're not entirely, inaccurate. They've gone into a lot of detail, and actually, I think we sort of lose that in our assessment of Evil of the Daleks is how effective this house will have been, because filming's a big deal in Doctor Who, and you wouldn't go to film at a location unless it was really going to enhance the production. If we think about a lot of the location filming in Doctor Who, that's what this house was, but it was making use of a big beautiful house. And because we don't have any of that in episode 2, I think that would be something that when it comes back would give it a real extra dimension. But I'm still thinking about Gilbert O'Sullivan. Did you think, what's like, I could call myself Roger O'Hammerstein. Gilbert O'Sullivan. Anyway, so I've been to Grimsdyke House. There's a very posh restaurant there. I was taken by Steve Roberts from the restoration team, actually, of whom it's a favourite haunt, and said, "Should we go to Maxtable's house?" And there was a few Doctor Who fans there. It was an evening where a few and my life prior to my one-man show, Moss Ate My Doctor Who Scarf, was I didn't really hang around with Doctor Who fans at all. I was part of fandom very briefly before I went to university, but only for a short time. But I've never not really part of organised fandom. It was unusual for me to have Doctor Who fan friends, apart from brief periods. So suddenly in later life to be going to Maxtable's house with people whose names I'd read on the internet, Steve Roberts among them, who's since become a friend. It's a very interesting later chapter in my life, having not had that early thing of being I discovered Doctor Who was very much a lone pursuit. I lived in the countryside in the middle of nowhere, and I got holds of loads of old Doctor Who magazines, courtesy of a friend of a friend. He was the one Doctor Who fan I knew, but he lived in Wolverhampton, which was miles away, but he kindly lent me all of his own old Doctor Who magazines, which was a real education. So again, I pieced together my Doctor Who knowledge, and I soaked it up, and I wasn't one for outsides, so I was inside. I would go, why don't you go outside and get some fresh air? Why would I do that? I've got dusty old Doctor Who magazine. Oh, Kemmel, Sonny Caldinez bending a metal bar to prove his strength. That would have been just a nifty, simple thing to do, but that would be impressive. And he's got, from that shot, his muscles great. Now, a friend of mine told me that Sonny Caldinez, Kemmel, if it wasn't the All In Wrestling, because Sonny Caldinez was a wrestler, once actually did wrestle as Kemmel, because wrestlers they assume sort of characters, and I don't know if he borrowed his costume or whether he did an approximation of his costume, but I'm sure I've not verified this, but he's a friend I trust. He wrestled as the mighty Kemmel or whatever. So is that the first time a Doctor Who character has then got a life outside of Doctor Who in another medium? So the mighty Kemmel has done if not the All In Wrestling. We used to watch the wrestling on a Saturday afternoon like a religion. I remember it was it was like finding out about Santa Claus when somebody told me it was all fixed. For those of you not in the UK, wrestling, because you have the WWF and all of that. Ours wasn't quite as glamorous or as hammy. Well, it was quite hammy. So, yes, Kemmel. Oh, well, Sonny Caldinez, of course, has a great history with Doctor Who, because he comes back as various Ice Warriors. And of course, it's only when I did this as a book I did with Rob Shearman called Running Through Corridors that it became apparent that 2 stories in a row, there's a strong, silent black man, which is a sort of cliche, and I I think those predisposed so to do would see it as an example of you know backwards thinking. But uh, they're both actually good and benign characters, and there's no point yelling at history for living within the mores of its own era. I think there's nothing to be achieved from that, and the I know from interviewing actors, and I've spoken to an academic that interviewed a lot of black actors from the 50s and 60s who said they were they were treated very well. And although, gosh, in Quater, I found some paperwork for Quatermass in the Pit, and there's a black actor in episode 1, Lionel Ngakane, who went on to be a great man of the theatre in South Africa, but was based in the UK. He was South African, based in the UK. And on the paperwork, it says, in the dressing room allocation, he has a separate dressing room, and it says, note, and it uses the word coloured, which you wouldn't use, it became out of date very quickly. Coloured actor, give own dressing room or something like that. And you go, is that just... Well, that's for various reasons, but it's quite sobering when you read that. And and I talked to a modern TV producer friend of mine. I mentioned it, and she went, "Well, that's the producer's fault. The producer's out of order." And I went, "The producer was a Jew, an Austrian Jew escaped from Hitler." So I think things are a bit more complicated than that. And I think there's a tendency to yell at history to make ourselves look good, which I think is fruitless. And it's a non-spendable currency, and there's in fact, Marius Goring, interestingly, was described to me once by a fellow actor as right of Genghis, and he lost a lot of money because he was high up in equity, and he took equity to court a couple of times. But I remember he did lose a lot of money because he took equity to court about selling programs to South Africa, apartheid South Africa, and that was interesting because as a kid, I mean, we didn't have Jaffa oranges in our house because the apartheid regime was, a terrible thing, and we would not support it as a household via the medium of shopping. That's what you did in those days, and so equity were of a similar view. They didn't deal with apartheid South Africa. It would be seen to be supporting the regime if you sold British television programs featuring actors from British equity to South Africa. Whereas Goring was of the opinion that politics shouldn't get in the way of equity members making money through foreign sales, which is a position to take that is it's easy to go, oh, well, then he was a racist. Well, or he just thought, or he was a pragmatist. I don't know. I don't agree with him, but I'm also not quick to throw around the epithet racist. And also, his wife, Lucy Mannerheim, was again a German Jew who'd escaped from Hitler. So people are complicated. But yes, poor old Marius. He and one of the people who spoke very much against him was a black actor from Doctor Who, Louis Mahoney, who, as I record this, died not that long ago. And I remember reading about it at the time, thinking of Ponty from Planet of Evil and Theodore Maxtable arguing with each other, and it gave it a whole Doctor Who frisson for me. I actually met Marius Goring. He was in a production of... what was it called? A play... wasn't Dangerous Corner, but it was something like that, and Agatha Christie, with Michael Cashman off of Time Flight and EastEnders, and now The House of Lords, and Marius Goring, and Glyn Edwards, Dave from Minder, who was never in Doctor Who and should have been a good actor. And I met Marius Goring. He had a little dog, and I had a crap biro, so I have Marius Goring's autograph in one of my Doctor Who books in knackered biro, and it was before the days of, I didn't have a camera, so I couldn't get a snap or anything. But I met Marius Goring very briefly. I've never met Jo Rowbottom. She is the mother of a friend of mine, and he did try to get me an interview, but apparently she's not keen to talk about her acting career, which went on for, a lot of actresses dropped off the radar quite early, but she was in a sitcom, Romany Jones, which with James Beck, who was thought of for Toby. Interesting. And was appearing in stuff, well after I knew that she was in Doctor Who. I'd see her pop up in things like The Bill and stuff. And she has got a lovely quality, but some people just don't want to talk about their careers, which is totally understandable. It's a shame because I always think of them as the ones that got away, especially if they're known to somebody. But of course, we think that people's memories of 4 weeks or whatever spent doing a Doctor Who, that's precious information. Well, I mean, if you ask me what I did in March 1992, I would have no idea. Yeah, but what about those people you knew then? Well, yeah, maybe vaguely. But I'd still like to chat to Joe Rowbottom because I think Molly Dawson's lovely. She's a great character and she's great companion material because she's quite feisty. She's this is a great scene. Doctor being mean to Jamie. I remember there was Doctor Who magazine, after they were sort of running out of things to do in Doctor Who archives, they did a series called Nostalgia. And it was another way of looking at a story. But I remember they talked... Nobody talks about nostalgia anymore. Nostalgia ain't what it used to be. I thought it was called Nostalgia. This is great. And we know and love Fraser Hines because he's very funny. And he's always game to give a scene a bit of extra comic energy, and his rapport with Troughton, his comic rapport with Troughton is gold. But he's great in this. And he's, this is, we've only just lost Ben and Polly, and this is, them suddenly exploiting this great dynamic they have between these two men. And Fraser Hines rises to the occasion. And the Doctor is at his most sort of manipulative and Machiavellian. And again, it seems like we're in part of an epic. Companions and Doctors, having a big schism doesn't happen that often. And look at, even that shot of the Doctor pointing, I don't know if that's from that scene, but that's a great telesnap. Yeah, I'm sick to death. This is Jamie's pretty fiercely crossed. That is a fantastic scene, and again, it really feels like you're getting to the guts of the show. But of course, the Doctor is manipulating him. That's what's really interesting, because Troughton is such a sort of joyful pixie. He scampers about and he capers like a child, and he's got that sort of innocent glint that he has. But underneath it all is a guy who contemplates terrible things, and you can tell he's seen terrible things. It's a terribly multi-layered performance, and we never quite let the if we don't want to, we don't actually quite need to let the Doctor off the hook for how he behaves in this episode, because he is manipulative. Windsor Davis and Gary Watson as Arthur Terrell. Gary Watson is another actor that's, well, he's not turned me down. I got his email address. He lives in my hometown, which I discovered when I was doing a play, and another actor in the play was, instead of staying in a local hotel, he was staying with his friend, Gary Watson. I said, I didn't know Gary Watson lived here. And he said, "Oh yeah, because he's retired now because he did all those voiceovers. Because Gary Watson was a brilliant voiceover man. In fact, I was told a story that he, because a friend of mine has interviewed him for a Zcast thing. So he agreed. That's what really upsets me, when somebody agrees to do an interview for somebody else, and then my friend gave me his email address, and I emailed him, went, and you live not far from my mum. I'd love to come and nothing." So it's like, so it's not that you won't be interviewed, you just won't be interviewed by me. That's happened with a few people. I could never get a letter back from Norman Jones, who played Creasong in The Abominable Snowmen, and he's in Doctor Who and the Silurians, and he's in The Mask of Mandragora. And I was like, well, he's obviously one of those actors that just doesn't reply to people. And I tried a couple of different attempts and a couple of different angles, and then somebody else I know he got a really chatty reply from. I was like, what did I do wrong? But anyway, Gary Watson is alive and well and living not far from my mum. But he basically retired because he did all the voiceovers for the adverts. A really good service, and it was in those days where you could earn a lot of money from voiceovers because you got paid properly and you got proper repeats. I think this is the only episode that has an exterior shot of the house, which I've just seen, and they did do an exterior, and I think this is the only one you see it in. And apparently Gary Watson's agent just rang him one day and said, look, Gary, you've got so much money coming in from your voiceover royalties, you can just stop if you want. And so he retired to a lovely market town, and I hope is very happy. But I hope also will at some point consider chatting to a local lad about Doctor Who. He's another one that got away. And he's not... And it's interesting, there aren't many actors of that period called Gary. It's one you sort of associate with, 80s kind of earthy actors. But I think he's posh. I think he's called Garraway or something. And so he's shortened Gary to make himself seem less posh, which seems odd because your instinct is to think that actors will flower up their names. Although actually there's an actor called Norman Hartley who's in The Invasion and The Time Meddler, who was, I think, Norman Greatorex or something. He had a brilliant name and changed it to Hartley. I think there was a period in the 60s when agents said, don't be too posh, son. I suppose because it's the kitchen sink and all of that sort of thing, that to be seen as posh was to be seen as not genuine and not earthy enough. So actors who ran the risk of sounding a bit posh had to suddenly go, no, man, I'm called John. I'm not called Balliol. Or whatever. What's Bob short for? Rupertville. So this is... my image of these... So a lot of these episodes is of indistinct action, but actually there's night filming here, isn't there, which is gorgeous. And again, I think we miss a lot of that because that's unusual. You don't get many. You get some nice nighttime scenes in studio, and that's very nice to light. But nighttime location filming, I think, would have looked quite special during this period. Although there is nighttime in Macra Terror as well, isn't there? But I don't know if that's on location. So again, I think that's so yes, Windsor Davis gets killed. Oh, but I think he's back next week as a corpse. So I think I talked about that in the last episode about actors. Yeah, Kennedy came back as a corpse. Windsor Davis comes back as a corpse. If you get killed close enough to the next episode, you get another episode fee. But yeah, I like the fact that Windsor Davis has been in Doctor Who, and he's the only person in the classic series of Doctor Who to be called Toby, and that was quite special to me because Toby is a rubbish name. I don't mind it so much now. I hated it as a kid, but I was relieved I wasn't called Tobias, because Tobias Vaughan is of course called Tobias, but I'm not. I'm just Toby. I'm shortened. I don't really approve of that. I think you should give somebody a long name, and then if they're jolly enough to have their name shortened. I don't believe in christening kids Charlie. The name is Charles. If they're jolly enough, people will call them Charlie, but you have to earn that. But I was quite glad I was not called Tobias. I don't know how I feel about that now. Anyway, yeah, this is all nice and dark and on film, and they'll have made good use of the house. And I suspect Derek Martinez will have shot it well because he makes a virtue of. Even in Galaxy 4, when that came back, and it's, there's some scenes that are potential to be quite dull. The way he frames all of his... And in Galaxy 4, he's basically got 4 women that look the same, but the way he keeps them in the picture and keeps the picture interesting. So with the freedom that film allows him, I think this could have looked quite special in a way that we probably don't appreciate. And this fight scene that is largely indecipherable to us... from this vantage point, I'm as I'm watching this is only occurring to me now. I'm confident will have been quite good. Oh, and that's the episode ending. So, yeah, Kemmel there to confront Jamie. Although I've got a feeling isn't the fight part of next week's episode ending as well? I can't remember. As I say, my feeling about these next installments is that they're a bit of a lull. So I hope that I am proved wrong, because I'm enjoying this. I'm certainly things are occurring to me that might not have done as I'm trying to sort of piece the pictures together. I like that. Very good. I hope you're enjoying Evil of the Daleks. I now have to choose something from this episode. The night. I do like that night filming, that darkness. I think that looks really impressive. But I also like the argument between... That's a classic scene, isn't it? The argument... No, I'd be naff to choose night filming, wouldn't it? I think there's night filming next week as well, so I could choose the night filming next week. No, what's night... No, I'm going to choose that scene between Jamie and the Doctor, because I haven't mentioned Fraser Hines and Patrick Troughton enough, because I just take for granted that they're brilliant, but also because Fraser is so often the jolly comic stooge, although he does the action stuff very well. But I think that's a more meaty scene for him that he doesn't get as many of. So for that, it's a real standout scene. What has Simon Guerrier chosen? He's probably chosen something to do with the fact that he's probably chosen something clever. He's weaved a web, no doubt.
My best thing about episode 3 of the Evil of the Daleks is the argument between Jamie and the Doctor. I actually think this is a mirror scene to the celebrated bit in Tomb of the Cybermen episode 3, where the Doctor talks about his past with Victoria. In both that and this, we're getting an insight into who the Doctor really is, a more devious, darker character, affected by stuff in his past, a kind of shade to him that we haven't had before. There's an interview with producer Innes Lloyd from about this time saying that they started Troughton too silly but are trying to redress that in the programme. And I think Troughton and Fraser Hines really go for it in this scene. I think it's great.
Yes. Yes! I got it! I got the same as Simon. And it's an amazing scene. Yeah, and it's weird because the thing about the Troughton being devious and a bit of a is he pulling people's strings? They're never particularly overt with it, but it's definitely there. Great stuff. Well, please join me for episode 4 of Evil of the Daleks, which because I'm doing this in the old-fashioned way. After episode 3, I'm going for episode 4, and we'll see what Jamie's fight with Kemmel is like when you can't actually see it. Thanks for joining me. I hope you're okay. Come back to my house soon. We'll polish off this adventure. Ta-ta. Thanks to my guest, Simon Guerrier, who typically was one of the first people on board with this podcast/videocast, because he's just enthusiastic and very kind and helpful. And why wasn't I surprised, as I say, was when he was one of the first people to send me a package. And what a package it is. Not a coincidence he's chosen Evil of the Daleks, because he has written an excellent book about it. It's one of the Black Archive books from Obverse Books, and he's gone into intense and certifiable detail, as is the style of those excellent books, which I can heartily recommend. From Obverse Books, The Black Archive. Number 11 is Simon's Evil of the Daleks. Happy Times and Places was presented by me, Toby Hadoke. and my special guest was Simon Guerrier. The music was by Dave Gates. Special thanks go to Chris Boyle, and the podcast artwork is by Dylan Patterson. My thanks to this episode's featured patrons: Peter Adamson, Richard Byatt, Paul Carrington, James Gould, Joe Llewellyn, Nathan Moore, Nick Temple, and Apollo C. Vermouth. Please go to www.tobyhadoke.com for more, and don't forget to rate, thumbs up, and generally be nice about this podcast everywhere you possibly can. It's easy for you, and it helps me, and I'll be very grateful. You can support these podcasts and any other of my broadcasting endeavours at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke and kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. Patrons get special goodies and advance releases, and of course, my eternal gratitude. Evil of the Daleks is available from the BBC as a narrated soundtrack. Episode 2 is available on DVD as part of the Lost in Time collection. Don't forget to subscribe to the official Toby Hadoke YouTube channel.